Do it, but someone might see. Apache girl said. The mountain man did it. And the whole town froze. The small town of Red Rock had always been quiet, almost too quiet. Nestled between jagged cliffs and dense forests, it was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and little ever happened to break the monotony. Most people spent their days tending to livestock, working the soil, or repairing the few wooden buildings that lined the main street. Children ran through dusty roads, laughing, their bare feet kicking up small clouds of dirt. The sun beat down during the day, making the red rocks shimmer, and at night the sky seemed so vast and bright that it almost felt like the stars could touch the mountains. Among the townsfolk, stories and legends were common, but few dared to test them. People whispered about old mountain trails that twisted through sheer cliffs, about hidden caves no one had ever explored, and about dangerous cliffs that loomed over the town like silent guardians. Most of the townspeople avoided these places, believing that some things were meant to be left alone. Only a few brave souls, or perhaps the reckless, would venture too close to the cliffs. One such soul was a young Apache girl named Ahioka. She had grown up on the edge of the wilderness, learning from her family how to move silently through the forests, how to track animals, and how to respect the power of nature. Her skin was sun-kissed, her hair long and dark, and her eyes bright with curiosity and mischief. Even at a young age, she was bold, often wandering farther than most dared to go. But Ahioka was not careless. She understood the dangers of the cliffs, the forests, and the wild animals that roamed the land. She knew enough to challenge people, but she never put herself in real danger without a plan. Then there was Silas Crow, the mountain man. Silas had lived on the outskirts of the town for years, a solitary figure who seemed to belong more to the wilderness than to the town itself. His face was lined with the weather of countless seasons spent outdoors. His hands were strong and scarred, a record of every climb, every hunt, every survival challenge he had faced. He rarely spoke to the townspeople, and when he did, his words were short and thoughtful, measured. Yet everyone knew of him. Stories of his climbing feats, his tracking skills, and his quiet courage had spread through Red Rock like wildfire. He was a man of action, not words, and his reputation was both admired and feared. On one hot afternoon, when the sun was high and the air shimmered above the dusty roads, Ahioka found Silas near the edge of town. The cliffs rose behind him, jagged and steep, their faces glowing a deep red in the sunlight. Ahioka watched him silently for a moment, considering her next words. Most people in town would never dare to even look up at the cliffs, let alone imagine climbing them. But she had a different plan in mind, a challenge meant to test the mountain man's courage and skill. "Silas," she called, her voice carrying across the quiet street. He turned slowly, his dark eyes meeting hers. "Do you think you could climb the cliff?" He studied her, reading her expression, trying to guess if she was serious. Ahioka smiled, a small, knowing smile. She was daring him, but not just for fun. She wanted to see him do something extraordinary, something that would remind the townspeople that courage could still exist in a world that often felt ordinary. "The cliff is dangerous," Silas said finally, his voice calm and steady. "Many have tried. Now, many have failed." Ahioka stepped closer, her eyes glinting with excitement. "I know, but I think you can do it."
"You're the only one who could."
She paused, leaning slightly forward as if to make the moment more serious. "But someone might see." Her voice dropped to a whisper, half teasing, half warning. The words hung in the air like a challenge, daring him to prove himself, while also reminding him of the risk. The townspeople, who had begun to notice the conversation, stopped what they were doing. Some leaned against the wooden fences lining the road. Others paused mid-task, curious to see what would happen. Red Rock had not seen a real act of daring in many years. Life was simple here, predictable, safe, and most people liked it that way. But when Ahioka's words reached Silas, the air seemed to change. A hush fell over the town, and even the wind seemed to pause. Silas looked at the cliffs, his eyes tracing the jagged paths that twisted up to the summit. Every ledge, every crevice, every rocky outcrop was familiar to him. Yet climbing it was no small task. It would take skill, patience, and courage. He did not hesitate, though. Without a word, he reached for his climbing rope and adjusted the pack on his back, preparing himself for the challenge. Ahioka stepped back, her heart pounding with excitement and fear. She knew the cliffs were treacherous, that a single misstep could be disastrous. But she also knew that Silas had climbed higher and farther than most men could even imagine. Still, the thought of him doing it where everyone could see made her stomach twist with nerves. She wasn't just curious about the climb itself. She wanted to see how the town would react, how people would feel when they witnessed something extraordinary unfold before their eyes. As Silas began his approach to the cliff, the townspeople gathered at a safe distance, whispering among themselves. Children clung to their parents, unsure whether to cheer or hide. The heat of the sun seemed to intensify, making the red rocks shimmer like fire. Birds circled overhead, their cries sharp and echoing. The wind rustled through the sparse trees, carrying with it the scent of dust and wild grass. Every detail of the environment seemed to add to the tension, making it feel as though the land itself was aware of what was about to happen. Ahioka watched closely, holding her breath as Silas reached the base of the cliff. He paused, looking up at the steep, jagged face above him. There was no fear in his expression, only focus. He adjusted the rope, testing the grip, feeling the texture of the rock with his hands. Then, without another word, he began to climb. The town seemed to go silent. The creak of rope, the scrape of boots against rock, and the faint murmur of wind were the only sounds. Ahioka's eyes widened as she watched him move, so confident, so steady, as if the cliff itself were a path he had traveled many times before. The other townspeople watched too, some holding their breath, others squinting to see his progress. It was difficult to follow each move, yet every handhold, every shift of weight, every careful step told a story of skill, courage, and experience. Ahioka felt a thrill of excitement mixed with anxiety. She knew this climb would not be easy. Even a man like Silas, experienced and strong, would have to concentrate fully to avoid mistakes. She glanced at the faces of the townspeople and saw the same mix of wonder and fear reflected there. This was not just a climb. It was a moment that would be remembered, a story that might be told for years to come. Hours could have passed in that first moment, yet it was only minutes. Silas moved methodically, each action deliberate, each decision critical. Ahioka's voice remained silent, though her thoughts raced. He can do this. He must do this. Everyone is watching. Don't fail now. Her words were unspoken, yet the weight of her challenge lingered in the air, pressing on him as surely as gravity pressed on his hands and feet. The sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the town and the cliffs. The heat of the day remained, but a slight breeze promised relief. For now, all that mattered was the climb, the challenge, and the quiet thrill of witnessing something extraordinary unfold in an ordinary town. Ahioka could feel history forming before her eyes, a moment that would define courage in Red Rock for years to come. And so, at the edge of a quiet town surrounded by wild cliffs and forests, A young Apache girl had issued a daring challenge, and a mountain man had accepted it. The quiet streets of Red Rock were about to become the stage for something no one would ever forget. Silas's boots touched the first ledge of the cliff, the rock rough against his fingers as he tested every handhold. The sun was high enough to make the red stone warm to the touch, and tiny particles of dust fell into the air with every careful movement. He paused for a moment, looking down at the town below, at the tiny figures of children running along the streets, at the adults whispering among themselves, and at Ahioka standing a little apart, her eyes wide and bright. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to feel the weight of their gaze. Each person below watched silently, holding their breath, unsure whether to cheer, to warn him, or to look away. Silas had faced danger many times, but there was something different about this climb. This was not just a test of skill. It was a test of perception, of bravery in front of witnesses. He adjusted the rope around his shoulder and gripped the jagged rock once again, moving with careful precision. The cliff rose like a wall, jagged and steep, yet Silas moved as if he had been born to climb it. His movements were deliberate, each step measured, each handhold chosen with care. The townspeople below watched in awe, unable to believe the courage and skill they were witnessing. Many had never seen a man climb such a cliff, let alone with the confidence and calm that Silas displayed. Children pressed their faces against the fences, whispering excitedly to one another, while adults stood frozen, unsure whether to look away or to continue watching. Ahioka's heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and fear. She had dared him to climb, but seeing him actually begin was far more intense than she had imagined. Her eyes followed his every movement, her stomach twisting with each careful step he took. The sun reflected off the cliff, casting shifting shadows across his figure as he moved upward, and the wind played with his coat, flapping it like a banner. She wanted to call out, to cheer him on, but she stayed silent, knowing that the quiet of the moment made every movement feel more dramatic, more dangerous. As Silas climbed higher, the cliff became even more difficult. Some sections jutted outward at sharp angles, forcing him to lean backward and find tiny footholds on the narrow ledges. Loose stones shifted beneath his hands, and he had to pause, testing the stability of every hold. He moved slowly, methodically, aware that even a single misstep could be disastrous. Every movement was precise, each decision critical. Below, the townspeople were silent, their collective tension almost tangible. Some held their hands to their mouths, while others gripped fences and wooden posts, afraid to let go. Even the usually quiet mountain paths and the birds in the sky seemed to pause in respect. The whole town felt as though it had been transported to a different world, a place where courage and skill were on full display, and where ordinary life had paused to watch something extraordinary. A sudden gust of wind blew across the cliff, rustling the sparse trees and sending dust into the air. Silas adjusted his grip, leaning slightly into the rock to maintain balance. The townspeople gasped collectively, and Ahioka's hand flew to her mouth. She had hoped he could do it, but seeing him challenged by the wind made her realize the real danger. Yet she also felt a thrill of admiration for his calm, his ability to remain focused under pressure. Every movement he made demonstrated not just strength, but patience, experience, and intelligence. Time seemed to stretch as he climbed. Minutes passed, then hours, though no one in the town kept track. The sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the cliff face. The golden light highlighted every ridge and crevice, making the climb look even more dramatic. Silas paused occasionally, testing a foothold, checking his rope, and studying the next section of the rock. Each pause was deliberate, a necessary step to ensure safety. He moved slowly but steadily, climbing higher with every careful action. She could feel the tension in her own body, the mix of fear and excitement twisting inside her. She realized that this moment was more than just a challenge. It was a lesson in courage, in focus, in quiet determination. Silas moved not recklessly, but with intention, showing the town that bravery was not about rushing forward, but about measured, thoughtful action in the face of danger. The cliff became steeper as he ascended, almost vertical in some areas. Silas reached for tiny cracks and ledges, using every bit of his skill to keep himself steady. Loose stones threatened to slip under his hands, but he adjusted, shifting his weight, testing each step before committing to it. The townspeople below watched, mesmerized by the skill and precision displayed. Many had never seen such calm in the face of danger, and their admiration grew with every move he made. Ahioka noticed how Silas's movements were not just about strength, but also about patience. He paused before every jump, considered every hold, and adjusted his position carefully. There was no rush, no reckless bravado, only focus. She realized that this was the difference between a man who survived the mountains and someone who would fall to his death. It was a quiet skill, invisible to many, yet impossible to miss for those who were truly watching. As he climbed, the townspeople began to whisper among themselves, their voices hushed with awe. "I've never seen anyone like him," whispered another. Children clung to their parents, wide-eyed and silent, while the adults could barely move, frozen by the tension of the moment. Even those who had seen Silas's skill before were amazed at the calm and determination he displayed now. It was one thing to hear stories. It was another to witness them firsthand. The wind grew stronger as he moved higher, tugging at his coat and testing his balance. Silas adjusted again, leaning into the cliff, moving with slow, careful precision. The rocks beneath his hands were warmed from the sun, the air thin and dry, and every movement required thought and concentration. Yet he continued, higher and higher, until the town below could barely distinguish him against the cliff face. Ahioka felt a shiver of excitement run through her. She had never imagined that watching someone climb could be so intense. The entire town seemed to be holding its collective breath, caught between fear and admiration. She realized that this climb was not just a challenge for Silas, it was a challenge for the town as well. It reminded everyone that courage could exist in the quietest, most ordinary places, that extraordinary things could happen even in a small, dusty town. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Silas reached a section where the cliff narrowed, and only a few ledges were available for support. He moved with calm determination, finding every hold carefully, testing every step before committing. The townspeople watched, unable to tear their eyes away. Ahioka's heart pounded with nervous excitement, and she could see the strain in Silas's movements, yet also the control, the experience, and the quiet confidence that had brought him this far. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden light over the town and the cliffs. Shadows stretched across the rocks, highlighting every ridge, every crack, every ledge. Silas paused for a moment, looking up at the remaining climb. The final stretch was the most difficult, steep and narrow, demanding every ounce of his skill and focus. He adjusted his rope one last time and began the ascent, moving slowly, deliberately, and with perfect control. Ahioka and the townspeople watched in silence, their hearts pounding, their eyes wide with wonder. The climb had become more than a test of skill. It had become a story in motion, a lesson in courage and patience. Every movement of Silas's hands and feet told a story of determination, experience, and quiet strength. It was a sight that none of them would ever forget, a moment that would live in Red Rock's memory for generations. The cliff seemed to rise higher and higher, the rock face turning steeper with every step Silas took. His hands were strong, his movements precise, yet every shift of weight carried a sense of risk. The townspeople below could barely follow him now. He looked smaller against the massive wall of red stone. From where they stood, his figure clung to the rock like a shadow, a tiny defiance against gravity itself. Yoka's heart pounded as she held her breath, her eyes locked on him. She felt a strange mixture of fear, admiration, and excitement. She had dared him to climb, but seeing him at this height made her stomach twist with nervous energy. The wind picked up, swirling around the cliffs, tugging at Silas's coat and whipping his hair across his face. A loose stone broke free under his hand, tumbling down the cliff with a sharp clatter that echoed across the town. Below, a hush fell over the crowd. Children pressed closer to their parents. Adults gripped fence posts and leaned forward, their eyes wide. Some covered their mouths, afraid to speak, afraid that noise could somehow disrupt the climb. The air felt charged, almost alive, as though the town itself were holding its breath, waiting for the next move. Silas paused on a narrow ledge, his back pressed against the cliff. He surveyed the rock ahead, calculating his next steps. One false move could send him slipping, but he did not rush. He adjusted his rope and tested the ledge with his foot, making sure it would support his weight. Every action was deliberate, each one a balance between caution and courage. The higher he climbed, the more precarious each handhold became, and yet he moved with steady confidence. His experience in the mountains had taught him patience, precision, and the power of careful planning. Yoka felt a surge of anxiety as she watched him. Her eyes followed his every movement, noting the slight tremble in his hands as he reached for a distant ledge. The wind had grown stronger, and it seemed impossible to imagine how he could continue upward. Yet Silas moved as if he were part of the rock itself, his body bending and stretching, finding tiny cracks and crevices for support. Each movement was deliberate, each pause a calculation. Yoka whispered under her breath, though no one could hear her, "You can do it. Just keep going." Some had leaned forward on their toes, trying to see the faint figure against the cliff. Others had tilted their heads back, shielding their eyes from the sun, desperate to catch even a glimpse of him. Murmurs ran through the crowd, soft gasps and whispered exclamations, but no one dared shout or distract him. The tension was thick, almost suffocating, as if the entire town were suspended in the moment alongside him. Every second stretched into eternity, every movement a testament to courage and skill. As Silas climbed higher, the cliff narrowed, forcing him to make longer reaches between handholds. His muscles burned, and sweat ran down his face, but he did not waver. The rock above him jutted out sharply, a challenging overhang that required both strength and balance. He paused, gripping the ledge with one hand, swinging his body slightly to reach the next hold. The townspeople gasped collectively. Children clutched their parents, some whispering prayers, others holding their breath in silent awe. Yoka's eyes were wide, her lips pressed together in a thin line. This was the moment that would define the climb, the moment when courage met danger.
Work.
The wind howled through the cliffs, whipping dust and small stones into the air. Silas adjusted his position, leaning into the rock, using his body as a counterbalance against the force of the gusts. The overhang loomed above him, a jagged obstacle that many would have considered impossible. But Silas's hands and feet moved with precision, finding tiny cracks and ledges that seemed invisible from below. The townspeople's murmurs grew louder, a mix of fear and admiration. They had never seen such skill or calm under pressure, and their hearts raced with every shift of his body. Yoka's mind raced. She wanted to scream encouragement, to call out to him, but she knew that any distraction could be dangerous. Instead, she clutched her hands together and whispered quietly to herself, hoping he could hear the words in spirit. You can do this. You've faced worse. You are strong. Be careful. Her voice was small, but her hope and faith in him were immense. She felt a deep respect for Silas, understanding that true courage was not about recklessness, but about focus, control, and determination. The overhang required a delicate maneuver. Silas swung his body outward, feeling the hold beneath his feet shift slightly. He paused, testing the grip with his hands and adjusting his balance. The townspeople below gasped as he moved, their eyes wide with astonishment. Some clutched at their chests, unable to look away. Others leaned against each other, trying to steady themselves as they witnessed the incredible feat. Every small movement seemed monumental, a reminder of how thin the line between success and disaster could be. Minutes passed with agonizing slowness. Silas climbed higher, moving with careful, deliberate steps. The townspeople below were completely silent now, completely absorbed in the moment. Even the wind seemed to quiet slightly, as if giving him a chance to focus. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the cliff and illuminating the jagged rocks. Silas's shadow stretched out, moving slowly upward with him. The scene was almost magical, like a painting coming to life in real time. Suddenly, a small stone broke loose under his foot, sending a tiny cascade of dust tumbling down. The townspeople gasped sharply, their hearts skipping a beat. Ahioka's eyes widened in fear, and she instinctively stepped back, holding her hands to her mouth. But Silas did not falter. He adjusted his grip, shifted his weight, and continued upward. Every movement showed his experience, his skill, and his ability to remain calm, even when dangers seemed to loom. The town collectively exhaled, the tension easing slightly as he proved that courage and control could overcome fear. Silas continued to climb, each movement precise and confident. The overhang was conquered, and he reached a narrow ledge that allowed him to rest briefly. He paused, taking a deep breath and surveying the remaining distance. From below, the town could see the determination in his posture, the calm in his movements, and the skill that had brought him this far. Ahioka's heart swelled with admiration and relief. She realized that this climb was not just a test of strength, but a display of the quiet, steady courage that defined him. The cliff grew even steeper near the top, and the final ledges were tiny and uneven. Silas moved slowly, testing each one, adjusting his rope, and using his body to maintain balance. The townspeople watched in silent awe, their emotions a mix of fear, anticipation, and admiration. Children clung to their parents, whispering prayers and holding their breath. Adults leaned forward, trying to see each movement, their eyes wide with amazement. Every motion of Silas's hands and feet told a story of focus, determination, and quiet strength. Ahioka felt her chest tighten as she watched him reach the final section. The overhangs, narrow ledges, and sharp rocks made it almost impossible to see where he would place his next hand or foot. But Silas moved with skill and confidence, testing each hold, adjusting his balance, and moving steadily toward the top. The town was frozen, caught between awe and fear, completely absorbed in the climb. Every moment was suspenseful, every movement critical, and every second felt like an eternity. Finally, Silas reached the last ledge before the summit. He paused, looking out over the town, the cliffs, and the wide-open wilderness beyond. The wind had calmed slightly. The sun was dipping low in the sky, and the town held its collective breath. Ahioka's eyes shone with admiration, and the townspeople could barely move, caught in the power of the moment. He had conquered the most dangerous part of the climb, proving skill, patience, and courage beyond question. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. The town, the cliffs, the wind, and the sun all came together in a perfect scene of suspense and triumph. Silas had reached the point where the danger was greatest, and he had overcome it with quiet skill and determination. Ahioka realized that this was the moment that would define the story, the moment that would be remembered and retold for generations. Silas's hands gripped the final ledge, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. The cliff, which had seemed impossible moments ago, now lay conquered beneath him. He paused, letting his eyes sweep over the town below. The rooftops small and dusty against the red earth. The streets were nearly empty save for the townspeople who had gathered in silence, their heads tilted back to see him at the very top. The wind was gentler here, and the sun cast a golden light that made the rocks glow like molten copper. For Silas, the climb was not over yet, but the most dangerous part, the vertical stretch, the overhangs, the narrow ledges, was behind him. He stood slowly, pushing his legs straight and stretching his arms wide for balance. The top of the cliff was a small plateau, barely large enough for a man to stand comfortably, yet it offered a view that took his breath away. Below him, the town seemed so small, so ordinary, yet it was full of people who had watched him rise against impossible odds. Beyond the town, the mountains stretched endlessly, the forests and valleys bathed in the warm light of late afternoon. The wind tasseled his hair and flapped his coat, but it felt gentle now, almost like a reward for the effort it had demanded earlier. The townspeople stared in disbelief. Their mouths hung slightly open, their eyes wide. Some whispered to each other, barely able to believe what they had seen. Others shook their heads in amazement. Children jumped and clapped silently, too afraid to cheer too loudly in case it broke the magic of the moment. Even those who had heard stories of Silas's skill were stunned by the calm, quiet triumph of his climb. They had watched him conquer what they thought was impossible, and the sight had changed something in them. Courage, they realized, was not just a story. It could be seen, felt, and admired. Ahioka's heart raced as she watched him stand at the summit. She could hardly believe her eyes. The mountain man had not only accepted her challenge, he had mastered it. She felt a deep sense of admiration, mixed with relief. She had dared him to climb, but seeing him actually reach the top was far more intense than she had imagined. Her chest tightened, her stomach fluttered, and she smiled, a mix of pride and awe. She understood now that true courage was quiet, focused, and patient. It did not shout or boast. It simply acted, even when the world was watching. Silas took a deep breath, letting the air fill his lungs, and he looked around. The wind carried with it the faint scent of pine and dust. The cliffs stretched on either side of him, jagged and beautiful, a reminder of the wild, untamed land he had spent his life learning to navigate. The plateau beneath his boots was rough and uneven, yet solid enough to support him, and for a moment he simply stood there, letting himself enjoy the view and the stillness. He had climbed not for glory, not for the townspeople, but because the challenge demanded it, and because he had the skill and courage to meet it. Below, the town remained silent for a few moments, as if no one dared to break the spell. Then, slowly, small murmurs began to rise, whispers of amazement and admiration. One person clapped, and another joined in, cautiously at first. Soon the applause grew, spreading across the streets and into every corner of the town. Children laughed and cheered, jumping up and down in delight. Adults smiled, some wiping away tears they did not know had come. The entire town had been witness to something extraordinary, something that would be remembered for years, and they could not contain their emotions any longer. Ahioka's voice finally broke through her awe. She called out softly, "Silas, you did it!" Her words carried across the distance, and Silas looked down, nodding slightly in acknowledgement. There was no need for elaborate gestures or words. His calm smile, his steady stance at the summit, spoke louder than any speech ever could. Ahioka felt a surge of joy and pride. She had issued the challenge, but he had turned it into a moment of triumph, not just for himself, but for everyone who had watched. The sun continued its descent, casting long shadows across the cliffs and the town below. The golden light made the red rocks glow even more, highlighting every ridge and crevice. Silas raised his arms slightly, a small gesture of victory, and the wind caught his coat like a banner. The scene was almost magical, as if the mountains themselves were celebrating his triumph. The townspeople cheered louder now, their voices carrying up the cliff in a wave of admiration and joy. Some waved their hats, others shouted congratulations, and children ran along the streets, thrilled to have witnessed something so extraordinary. Ahioka watched him with a deep sense of respect. She understood now that courage was not measured by reckless acts or loud displays, but by focus, skill, and quiet determination. Silas had faced danger calmly, moved with precision, and conquered the impossible, and the lesson resonated deeply. She realized that everyone in the town had learned something that day, that ordinary life could be interrupted by extraordinary acts, and that courage and determination were qualities that could inspire others in profound ways. Silas began to move along the plateau, carefully exploring the top of the cliff. Every step was deliberate, each movement measured, and every action displayed the skill that had carried him to the summit. He did not rush, nor did he boast. His triumph was quiet, dignified, and complete. The townspeople below continued to watch, their admiration growing with each step. Even those who had once doubted him or doubted the possibility of such a climb were now in awe of the man who had conquered the cliffs. Ahioka's excitement did not diminish. She ran her fingers along the fence as she watched him, feeling the thrill of having been part of something so remarkable. She had dared him, yes, but witnessing his triumph had given her a new understanding of bravery. She realized that courage was contagious, that one person's determination could inspire a whole town, and that even ordinary people could witness extraordinary acts and feel their lives touched by them. The wind played through the cliffs, carrying with it a sense of stillness and calm. The shadows lengthened, and the colors of the rocks deepened, painting the cliffs in rich reds, oranges, and golds. Silas stood at the edge, surveying the town, the forests, and the mountains stretching into the distance. The moment was serene, almost sacred, a reminder of the power of skill, focus, and courage. The townspeople began to disperse slowly, still talking in hushed, excited voices. They shared what they had seen with each other, pointing up at the summit, describing the calm determination and skill of Silas. Some would never forget this day, and many would tell the story for generations to come. They had seen a man confront danger with focus, patience, and courage, and the memory of it would remain with them, inspiring them long after the sun had set and the cliffs had faded into twilight. Ahioka lingered, unwilling to look away. She knew the climb had changed something, not just in Silas, but in the town, in herself, and in everyone who had watched. The challenge she had issued had led to a triumph that was bigger than anyone had imagined. It was not only about conquering the cliff, it was about courage, inspiration, and the reminder that ordinary people could witness extraordinary acts and feel their hearts lifted by them. Silas finally turned away from the edge, moving toward the flatter areas of the plateau. He did so slowly, carefully, without rushing, knowing that every step was important even after the most dangerous part of the climb was over. Ahioka's eyes followed him, and she realized that the triumph was not just reaching the top. It was the way he carried himself, the calmness, the skill, and the quiet strength that defined him. The sun continued its descent, painting the sky with shades of gold and crimson. The town below grew quieter, the excitement settling into a sense of awe and respect. Silas had reached the summit, and in doing so he had shown the town a lesson in courage that would last far longer than any ordinary event. It was a moment of triumph, not just for him, but for everyone who had witnessed it. As the shadows lengthened and the day grew cooler, Ahioka smiled, knowing she had been part of something truly remarkable. Silas had turned her challenge into a moment of inspiration, a story of skill, courage, and quiet determination that would be remembered for years to come. She understood now that the true triumph was not just reaching the top, but the way it had lifted the spirits of everyone in the town, reminding them that courage could exist in even the smallest, quietest places. The sun had dipped lower now, casting long, soft shadows across the town and the cliffs. The golden light turned the red rocks into glowing walls of fire, and the air grew cooler, carrying the faint scent of pine and dust. The townspeople began to stir, slowly returning to their homes and daily tasks, yet the excitement of what they had witnessed lingered in every conversation, in every gesture. Silas stood atop the plateau, looking down at the town that seemed so small from his vantage point. For him, the climb had been about skill and courage, about testing himself against the mountain. But for the town, it had been something far greater, a shared experience of awe, inspiration, and a lesson in bravery. Ahioka lingered at the edge of town, watching him carefully. Her eyes followed his every movement as he began his slow descent. Unlike the climb, which demanded intense focus and careful precision, coming down required patience and calm as well. Every step, every grip, and every shift of weight mattered. The town remained quiet, giving him space, their collective respect palpable. The children whispered among themselves, excitedly recounting what they had seen, while the adults murmured in amazement. It was a story that would be told for generations, a memory that would grow stronger with every retelling. Silas's descent was deliberate. He moved slowly, testing every foothold, adjusting the rope when necessary, and keeping his movements controlled. From above, the cliff looked impossibly steep, and from below, the townspeople held their breath with every motion. Ahioka felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. She wanted him to be safe, to return to the ground without incident, but she also wanted to savor every second of this incredible event. She realized that the climb was only part of the story. The return was equally important, a demonstration of continued focus, patience, and skill. The townspeople's reactions were a mixture of relief and admiration. When Silas reached the halfway point, a few began to clap softly, careful not to distract him. Children jumped with excitement, pointing upward and whispering to their parents. Adults exchanged glances, acknowledging that what they had witnessed was beyond ordinary experience. Silas's calm confidence inspired them all. Even those who had doubted the possibility of the climb now understood that courage and skill could transform the impossible into reality. Ahioka's heart raced as she watched him near the base. The climb had tested not only his physical strength, but his patience, focus, and courage. Every step downward required him to think carefully, to adjust, to remain calm under pressure. The wind had shifted, making some sections more treacherous, and the narrow ledges demanded complete attention. Yet Silas moved steadily, his body a model of control and experience. She realized that this moment, the descent, was just as remarkable as reaching the summit. Courage was not only about daring acts, but also about finishing them safely and responsibly. As he neared the ground, the townspeople began to cheer louder. Their voices carried across the dusty streets, echoing against the cliffs. Children clapped and ran toward the base, while adults raised their hats in salute. The energy of the town had shifted from awe and tension to celebration and admiration. Silas's quiet triumph had transformed the ordinary afternoon into a historic event, a memory that would linger in Red Rock for years to come. When he finally stepped onto solid ground, a collective sigh of relief swept through the crowd. Children rushed forward, eager to see him up close, while adults approached cautiously, offering words of praise and congratulations. Silas's face, lined with sun and wind, held a calm smile, his eyes reflecting the satisfaction of a challenge completed. He nodded to Ahioka, who stood slightly apart, her eyes shining with pride and respect. She had dared him, yes, but he had transformed the challenge into a story of triumph that belonged to everyone who had witnessed it. The town gathered around him, asking questions and sharing their amazement. Some wanted to know how he had managed to climb such a difficult cliff. Others marveled at his patience, his careful movements, and the way he had remained calm under pressure. Silas answered only briefly, his words measured and calm. He did not boast or exaggerate. He simply explained his approach, the importance of focus, and the necessity of patience and careful calculation. The townspeople listened intently, eager to understand the process behind the extraordinary feat. Ahioka stepped forward, unable to contain her excitement. "I didn't think anyone could do it," she admitted, her voice full of admiration. "But you proved me wrong." Silas smiled faintly, his eyes meeting hers.
"It was never about proving anything to you," he said.
"It was about meeting the challenge and respecting the mountain." His words carried weight, a reminder that true courage was not about glory, but about respect, skill, and calm determination. As the sun set, painting the sky with shades of orange, pink, and purple, the town began to quiet down. The energy of the day settled into a warm, reflective glow. People returned to their homes, but the story of the climb spread quickly, whispered among neighbors, shared with children, and discussed in hushed, excited tones. The day had become a turning point for Red Rock, a reminder that extraordinary acts could happen anywhere, that courage and skill were not limited to legends, and that one person's determination could inspire an entire community. Ahioka remained at the edge of the town for a while longer, watching Silas as he packed his rope and prepared to leave. She realized that the story was not only about the climb, but about the impact it had on everyone who had witnessed it. Children would remember it as a day of wonder and inspiration. Adults would remember it as a lesson in courage and humility. And Silas, quiet and steady as ever, had shown them all that extraordinary achievements required preparation, patience, and respect for the challenge at hand. The mountain man's presence had always been a part of Red Rock, a quiet figure on the edge of the wilderness. But today he had become something more, a symbol of skill, courage, and quiet determination. People would speak of the climb for years, telling the story with the same awe and excitement that they had felt that afternoon. Ahioka knew that she had witnessed something rare, something that would shape her understanding of bravery and inspiration for the rest of her life. As twilight deepened, Silas began to walk away from the town, heading toward the forests and mountains that had always been his home. He moved with the same quiet confidence he had shown throughout the climb, his steps steady, his mind calm. The townspeople watched him go, some waving, some simply nodding in silent respect. The story of the day was complete, but its impact would continue to grow, carried in conversations, retold to children, and remembered whenever the cliffs loomed over the town. Ahioka finally turned to leave, her heart full. She knew that the day had been extraordinary, not only for Silas, but for the entire town. Courage, skill, and determination had been on full display, and the town had been reminded that ordinary life could be touched by extraordinary acts. The story would live on, inspiring those who had witnessed it, and shaping the way Red Rock viewed bravery, patience, and quiet triumph. The mountain stood silent, the cliffs glowing softly in the fading light. The wind carried whispers through the trees, echoes of the climb, and the town settled into the calm of evening. But the story, the memory of courage and skill witnessed by all, would remain. Red Rock had seen something unforgettable, and its people would carry that memory forward, remembering the day when a mountain man, guided by skill and courage, rose to a challenge and changed the way everyone saw bravery. In the quiet of the approaching night, Ahioka looked up at the cliffs one last time. She smiled, knowing that the story would live forever in her heart and in the hearts of the townspeople. Silas had not only conquered the cliff, he had inspired everyone who had watched, leaving a mark on the town and its people that would never fade. Courage, patience, and determination had triumphed, and Red Rock would never forget the day when ordinary life met extraordinary skill.